Hello, can you hear me? I can't hear you if you can hear me. I can see you though. Can you hear me? Thumbs up. Yes, you can hear me. You give me a visual signal. Yeah, okay, so you can hear me. I can see you, but I can't hear you. Oh, wait, here, I might have to, actually, that might be my fault.
Okay, here we go. No, I've done something.
Yes.
That's better. We're on. We'll go.
Yeah. Hi,
Very
Will.
good.
Thanks for being here.
No, a great pleasure. Where are you speaking from? Brown?
Yeah, in Providence, Rhode Island.
Are all the lovely cherry trees out at this time?
Well, it was a very odd, well, basically not an odd spring, an absent spring, really. It was just cold, and now it's going to be very hot.
I remember catching one year the most fantastic blossom.
Yeah.
At the end of the gorgeous.
Usually it's lovely, you know, just pinks, all the pastels, you know, yellow, white, you know, light purple. And it's really idyllic. It's beautiful.
This year it was the four horsemen of the apocalypse.
Yeah, totally. So
They've just been spotted on the outer ring road, all four of them.
Yeah, circling us.
Mm.
So
we actually have a cloud of locusts heading for Delhi at the moment.
Oh my God! Oh yeah, one of the great pestilences. I might even talk about locusts. That comes up in some of these poems. So.
Oh, brilliant! Well, let's have a locust poem for social media, quick.
Done. I guarantee that for you. So first, I just want to ask you and your family and everyone, they're well and safe and.
Couldn't be better. I mean, the reality is that the lockdown, which was a catastrophe for migrant labor and the poor, has served the middle class as ever in this country very happily.
Yeah.
And we have been protected from the virus. There's been nothing, but it is now they're unlocking. Now it's going to come.
Yeah.
I think we're just at the beginning in reality.
Yeah.
I've just been working. I mean, if you're a writer or a painter like my wife, it's absolutely fine.
Yeah, I know. I have to admit, I'm actually flourishing right now myself.
More time, more focus.
Exactly.
I've lost 15 kilos. I'm very pleased with myself.
Wonderful. I know eating out is one of the worst things you can do in life. I mean, it's terrible.
God, does one miss it?
Well, I love to cook, so I've really taken my game up in the kitchen, which has been lovely. I'm baking bread and sushi and good stuff.
Terrific seafood in Providence.
Yeah, except it's all vegetarian for me, vegetarian seafood. But Japanese food can be done in a very vegetarian way. It's fantastic.
One of the best seafood restaurants I've ever been to down on the river.
Hemingway's, was it?
I can't remember what it's called. Hemingway, maybe Hemingway.
Yeah. Oh, I'll take you to a much better seafood place next time. Hemingway's is the downtown. You got to go to the shack. You got to go to the seaside where the guy catches it for you right there. Yeah, we'll do that.
I'm game for that.
Okay, done. So we have a few people waiting. I'll just let them in. Let's just have fun. I think both you and I are just casual people, and let's just enjoy a good chat.
How long? I say how long? I mean, I'm just going to do a very quick introduction.
Yep, quick introduction.
Very good.
And then I'll read a little bit, and then we'll chat, and we'll try to wrap up in like an hour, and that's it.
And how would you like to be described? Mainly as a satirist and a translator, or what else should I put in?
Oh, just that anything is fine. That I'm an academic, I'm a musician, and that's the two main things. Yeah. Great.
It's good. It's a great spread of talents. Fantastic. No. Let them in. And how long is the session? Is 1 hour total?
Yeah, let's about an hour. Let's say we'll just see how it goes. But
and you'll talk for most of that.
And no, we'll converse for most of that. I would say. I'd love to just open it up and at the end maybe there's 3 people here.
Open with a bit of Dick Eaton talking about how no one writes about the Deccan and no one does biography.
Oh, let's do it, man. That's what I'm talking about. And I want to hear from you. So let's just enjoy this time.
Sure.
All right. I'm letting everyone in.
Good. Great.
All right. I think,
We'll start to go.
yeah, we have Will Dalrymple is here. Sudhir
Hi,
Jain.
everyone.
Yeah,
Hello.
this is Professor Jain, the director of IIT Gandhinagar. Casey Pandey, and R. Shivapriya, who, Will, you know.
Hi, Srinivas. How are
Yeah.
you?
Hi, Will. How are you?
Lovely to hear your voice. I've been grazing prolifically in lockdown on all your Penguin classics.
Oh,
Exactly.
I wish I could say the same, but
You've already read them. I've been doing the catch-up. I was doing the your lovely Dasa Kumara charity yesterday. I've been
that's lovely.
reading up on
The
Dandan.
structure. Yeah.
Wow, you guys are into some heavy stuff. I got to catch up.
Dandan is far from heavy. It's very light. It's actually, I'm amazed no one, there's some very good vampire stories in the Dasa Kumara charity. And it needs to be made. We haven't yet seen the big Bollywood vampire film. It's set in 8th century Mahabalipuram.
Oh yeah, I mean, like, you know, Vikramaditya and the ghosts, that whole set of stories. I remembered loving those. You know,
It's full of good fun and very far from heavy. Very good light entertainment.
Yeah.
Quite a lot of snacks. I mean, everything you want, really. It's all set and free.
Yeah, totally. I mean, even this book. I mean, the story of a great Deccan king. It's just like waiting for cinematic realization.
So, I haven't done this, but can you imagine the pig's ear Bollywood will make of it?
That's what I never want to happen. Like, if this is made, it should be made in a truly magnificent way.
By the time Bollywood have finished with it, Krishnadevaraya is going to have taken Bijapur, Golconda, and the Mughal Empire.
Yeah, exactly. I should tell you off the record the kind of blurbs that were suggested for the little the cover thing. Oh my gosh, don't get me started. So anyway, we can start our conversation. I'll pass it over to Will to start, and then we'll get into a dialogue soon enough. And I thank everyone who's online joining us for being here, supporting us, and hope you're all safe and sound. Over to you, Will. Thank you so much for being here.
Okay, well, I'm very honored to be asked to introduce the session. Srinivas Reddy, known to us all, but in so many different ways, in so many different avatars. Academic, but also astonishing concert guitarist and translator. And very rarely do those three talents end up residing in the same avatar, in the same body. And what a lucky man to that. And yet, how often translators are often musical. The translators I know, so many of them play the piano or something. There is definitely something in the brain that links the talent for languages and the talent for music. I've just lost my closest collaborator, a wonderful man called Bruce Wannell.
I know, I heard that. Yeah.
Very sad. And he was an extraordinary translator, mainly from Persian, but also, and delightfully, a wonderful pianist. And wherever we would go, he would end up finding his way to some grand piano and making friends as well as making merry. Anyway, to business. We're here today to talk about a book that everyone here knows about, but nonetheless needs to be thoroughly celebrated. Raya, Krishnadevaraya of Vijayanagara, the epic true story of South India's greatest king. And perhaps the best sort of way to enter into this is to go via a book that came out a decade earlier, Dick Eaton's Social History of the Deccan, which has a fabulous and very important introduction that makes 2 points, really. One is that so much of Indian history is written from the perspective of Delhi. Not a new point, but an important one. And the fact that so much of the understanding, not just of North India, but the whole of the Deccan and the southern tip of the peninsula, is still always wrapped into national narratives that tend to be focused on the modern capital, Delhi. And how rare it is, he says in this book, that people bother to write about the Deccan. And for every library of Mughal material, there's only a handful, a small shelf of books on the Deccan. And he then goes on to make a second point, which I think is even more important, because in the decades since Dick wrote this book, there has been a lot of Deccan history. There's been the major exhibition of Met, there's been a whole series of conferences about that. And so, in a sense, I think what the complaint he makes there, that the Deccan is ignored, is less true now than it was when he wrote it. But the second point he makes is still absolutely the case, and he says, why is there no biography in Indian history? Recently, Sunil Kilnani made the same point, I think, in his Incarnation series, which started off as a British BBC Radio 4 series, and he said the words he used from memory was something like, in Indian history is a curiously unpeopled place. Which is it's a very nice phrase. That so much of the astonishing scholarship which has come out of Indian academia on the Indian past is through the prism of social and economic history, and political history is less central, and even less central still is the whole project of biography. And I just read from what Dick wrote. Ushering in the advent of social history as a new and exciting subfield within the broader disciplines of history, this manifesto encouraged many to explore the past not by tracing the lives of individual actors, but by studying vast socio-economic forces. For more than a century, continues Dick Eaton, most social historians would view biography with a degree of suspicion. Even today, the genre is seldom found in doctoral dissertations submitted to departments of history. Now that, of course, is true, and it's a very odd thing. I mean, as recently as 2 decades ago, there were virtually no biographies of anything in pre-modern Indian history. You couldn't go into a bookshop and buy a biography of Akbar, for example, or Dara Shikoh, or Shah Jahan, or Aurangzeb. There were Victorian books around of varying quality and varying degrees of sort of colonial prejudice. But for at a time when, if you walked into an American bookshop in say the turn of the millennium, you would find walls of biographies of every single American president and every vice president and most of the other major figures in American history, and whole libraries about people like George Washington or Samuel Adams, who are constantly being written about. And yet in Indian history, there's no equivalent. There is no world of serious biography, and what little there was is either very popular and unsourced, or very old and imperialist. So, which brings us to Raya, which is, I believe, is it the first modern biography
of Krishnadevaraya?
Yes.
Yeah, I think it is. There's been a couple in Telugu somewhat recently, but this is the first sustained work in English, yes.
And why do you think that is? I mean, that is an odd thing. He is the premier, most famous king of South India.
It's a great question. I wondered that too, even when I did my thesis work. I mean, you have Telugu literature, the largest, vast literary tradition that's there, and what they call, the Pancha Mahakavyas, the 5 great works. I mean, people have barely even worked on those great pieces of literature. And one of them was Amok, which the king himself wrote, and no one had translated this. No one had even read this stuff and put it in the bigger discourse of academic work and other kinds of things that were translated into English. So it's surprising. It's indicative, of course, of this general north-south imbalance, yes, but also which also carries on into academia for sure, and in our academic study of India, but certainly also the aspect that you mentioned about biography being kind of not present. I mean, there's a way that it's a complicated issue, but the way that history is understood in India, the way the myth is understood in India, and the way sometimes biographies in India are kind of like these just shining pinnacles of virtue and splendor, and it's like you can't touch
If you
that
have any
image.
biography, it is hagiography. It is,
Exactly. Everyone's a saint.
Nehru by Congress candidates.
Right. And then you don't want to be critical to anyone. You don't want to hurt people's feelings. That's also part of our Indian way. And so,
The face of James Lane looming before us all.
yeah. So there's multiple challenges here on that front. So, I mean, I think the irony of the situation at hand actually is the wealth of information that we do have that we're simply not exploring and bringing to the conversation. So
just before we opened up publicly, you and I were talking about Dandan and the work. I've just been reading this in the last few days, and again, Mahendra Pallava, he wrote plays. There are tens of thousands of inscriptions.
Oh yeah.
He has Dandan is at the court towards the end of his life.
Oh yes.
It's so rich, and yet no one seems to be pulling the human stories together, least of all into a form that anyone wants to read.
That's it, and it's so human. I mean, you have a South Indian king writing about kapalikas, like drunken, Shaiva guys walking around with skulls, getting in brawls at drinking houses, and then all of this leads to a discovery of hasya rasa being the most important thing, humor. I mean, the kind of level of thought in India is amazing. And just about Dandan, I'm teaching a class right now, classical Indian literature at an Institute of Technology. I have 40 kids. They're totally into it. They just need exposure. And I have one student who's actually translating part of Dandan from Kavya Darsha. So that's the more technical stuff, but he's taking some poems from that and saying, why are these poems important? So we just need to give exposure and bring it to a conversation and not make this stuff feel like it's inaccessible or uninteresting, because it is absolutely the opposite.
And tell me about your personal journey to Raya, where this began with dissertation work or as an undergraduate or visiting Humpy the Kid, or
Well, as a kid, you just growing up learning about Krishnadevaraya as this great king, you hear about the stories, and there's these old Telugu movies you watch, and so that memory was there. But yeah, it started in grad school.
How is he depicted in the Telugu movies?
Oh, in the Telugu movies, he's it's always NTR. So N.T. Ramarao is always portraying him, who's already Krishna in most of the movies anyway. So Krishna's playing Krishnadevaraya. So that whole imagery is all in your mind. And, he's a great spokesman of that period of Indian film, which is absolutely, for me, those 50s and 60s films are pinnacles of film, and pinnacles. And especially the Telugu stuff, particularly in that period, with mythological, historical films are still fantastic. They never did a Krishnadevaraya specific movie, but we have Mahamantri Timurasu. That one's great. And also this one, Tenali Ramakrishna movie, which again, NTR plays the role. So he was always the idyllic king, the most awesome king who was a poet, who was a warrior. He was savvy. He was clever, just perfect guy.
A ladies' man too. Very
oh yes. Yeah. Ladies' man, of course, had many wives. Everybody loved him. Even the dreaded daughter of the Gajapati, was actually secretly in love with him before she tries to assassinate him. I mean, it's great stuff. So those stories were there.
Academically, where did you confront him first?
Right. So in the childhood, all those stories were there, and then academically, it was in grad school. A friend of mine said, "Why don't you look at this Vijayanagara stuff?" And I said, yeah, this looks kind of interesting. And I started looking into it, and then finding that, this great king was also a great poet. And since my study was literature, this was just awesome. And no one had worked on it yet. So this was just a totally inspiring thing.
No one had worked on it in a lit crit sense, or no one had translated it, or both?
No one had worked on it in translating it, no. And no one had worked on it in a sustained critical fashion. I mean, the only real big scholars that you have in Telugu studies are Narayana Rao, and then of course David Shulman, and a few other people. But that critical study of academic Telugu studies
Sanjay Subramanian as well.
Yeah, Sanjay Subramanian, that whole constellation of scholars. Outside of those guys, you don't get much with Telugu, unfortunately, which is a shame. So that's another important thing to think about.
Was Narayana Rao an inspiration for you? I mean, he must be a generation older.
Oh yeah, much older, and most definitely an inspiration. I mean, that book, the classical anthology of the anthology of classical Telugu literature. I mean, that didn't leave my bedside for all of graduate school. I love that book. I mean, I think it's right here. I have it right here. I mean, here's my worn out copy. I mean, I read this book at least 200 times. I love that book. Those guys inspired me so much.
Customer, another great translation. When God is a customer. When God is a customer.
Yeah, of course. And that has the Kshetraya Padams. And then, of course, A.K. Ramanujan contributed to that volume, which is a beautiful one. Yeah.
Oh, that talent. So is there a whole generation coming up replacing those guys now? I mean, do you feel you're on your own in this world? How many scholars are producing good translations of Telugu at the moment?
Telugu is not too many. I think Narayana Garu and Harshita are doing a translation of Manu Charitram. Or no, sorry, not Parijata Apaharanamu, which is also a good source for Vijayanagara and Krishnadevaraya history. I think that should be coming out in Murthy series. But no, there aren't that many people doing a lot of translation work in Telugu.
And there's an awful lot of material.
Massive.
So often one hears, historians privately complain that they were too late. That in a sense, all the work's been done in so many fields. In your field, it seems it's completely virgin territory. I mean, Sanskrit to a certain extent, but Telugu, I mean, even more so.
Yes, absolutely. And like you said, even the Sanskrit, which we've looked at, we haven't looked at in that humanized kind of historical, rich kind of way. It's just always been this dry kind of philological stuff that the Sanskritists do, and it's all Upanishads and all that stuff. Yeah.
My eldest son has just come out of doing Sanskrit at Oxford.
Yeah, there you go.
And he said it was this sort of Manichaean thing between the kind of the incredibly rich, fascinating material he's been given, and the incredibly dull approach that was being taken very largely.
Yeah. And it's fortunate because that reflects the way that Indian knowledge systems have evolved in the modern period. Basically, we lost the traditional approach to understanding a language like Sanskrit or to learning, traditional literature. Once that modality lost, then you have to rely on this very dry, let me learn all my grammar rules and, be perfect in that way, and every dot and thing is crossed. But you lost the flavor of that whole verse. Did you understand the metaphoric understanding of that thing,
So, which brings us, in a sense, to the form of the book you've written. I mean, it's a very scholarly book, but it is not a dry academic text. You have definitely aimed it at a general audience.
Yes, that was my goal. I mean, I really do feel that, and I have to really be honest, you are a great inspiration in this regard. And I must say that, and I must thank you so much for reading the book and writing that wonderful blurb about it. It meant a lot because you are a perfect example of how you can combine deep research, it's very, minute scholarship at that academic level, and yet write in a way that can be engaging and rich and full for anyone who is interested to come and pick up and read without a jargon of unnecessary academic kind of stuff, and at the same time being able to talk about some very serious issues.
It's something that's completely unusual anywhere else in the world, but what is strange is that there's no one else until recently, until Manu Pillai and Iramukoti and this younger generation now coming up. It's just odd that there hasn't been this stuff before. Why are there not, 20 biographies of Shah Jahan in the bookshop? Where are they? Akbar, why is it this year we have for the first time 2 Akbar biographies appearing simultaneously? When for so long, if someone interested just couldn't go into a bookshop and get something else. And there is, I think, a fallout on this. And this is something I feel very strongly about. The fact that so much of Indian history is inaccessible to the general reader, has resulted in the growth of mythology to replace it, particularly on the right. And we have this, instead of informed historical discussion, I mean, it's true everywhere to a certain extent, but it seems to be particularly true with Indian history because there is so little readable, reliable, accessible work on Indian history. You do have a disproportionate growth of right-wing hate mythology. And anyone that ever ventures for 10 minutes on Twitter in a historical sphere comes across these, these tens of thousands of incredibly ignorant people who are open to discussion, and they're not that they're bad people or incredibly set in their ways that can't be, but that there is nothing for them to read, and the right got them. So their understanding of the Mughals or the whole Indo-Islamic phase of history, it seems to be as one long unmitigated catastrophe. And this and obviously the history of Vijayanagara has been very thoroughly infected with that virus.
Oh yeah, oh yes, and all of this relates back to colonialism as well, and kind of certain stereotypes being put in place. But just quickly on the top of my head, just
go for that for a second. Just give us the colonial background to this problem vis-a-vis Vijayanagara, the colonial historiography. How come that Vijayanagara has been set up as this sort of Hindu bastion facing marauding, barbaric Muslim hordes coming south?
Right. So that's the thesis. You're asking why do I think that was set up?
How does that? Yeah, how does that happen?
How does that work? Well, okay. I had a couple of thoughts on what you had said earlier, but maybe I'll get to this and we can circle back to those things. Because there's so much to talk about. I mean, that was one of the things this was called. The title of this was whatever, Hindu King in a Cosmopolitan World was the title, but that's just an ostensible thing. The main point I really think that we all have to remember is we as modern Indians are still functioning in a colonialist mindset, as is most of the world. I mean, America is basically still in that post-colonial mind, capitalist, industrialized modality. And so, our understanding of that history is still deeply, connected to that shackling of the mind of a certain narrative. And that basic narrative came from, again, modeling it on that simple system of Golden Age, medieval Dark Ages, Renaissance. And so when the British come to understand Indian history, it's the same thing. The great Sanskrit classics, the dark medieval period of the Muslims, and then now the Renaissance of basically the British rule to bring things back to the original glory. I mean, so that, when you get Sewell, who's the main guy, I mean, if you want to talk about the academic study of Vijayanagara, it's Robert Sewell writing this great book called A Forgotten Empire. So already the trope of something forgotten and lost is there.
1920s, 1930s?
It's like 1900, I think.
Right.
Right. And so that was a major work because that's where he translates the Portuguese chronicles of Nunes and Paez into English and writes quite an extensive introduction and annotation. So he really inaugurates, you could say, the study of Vijayanagara academically. And he sets it up right there. I mean, those words that you use, the kind of bastion of Hindu culture against the spread of Islam, that's all straight from Sewell. And this gets picked up and magnified and intensified over the years. And, I have a little section on the book when I specifically talk about this. And, this gets played out in different ways. And like you said, right now...
is a great believer in this whole vision, isn't he? In India, a wounded civilization, and in an area of darkness. He sets up Vijayanagara as the wound.
Who?
V.S. Naipaul.
Naipaul, yeah, sure, yeah.
And he very much takes the Sewell line that this is the heart of India's wound, the wound in the heart of its civilization.
Right. Yeah. That I would not see it that way at all.
No, but I think that's Naipaul's. No, nor would I. But that Naipaul take in both Area of Darkness and India, Wounded Civilization.
Yes, well, I mean, I think that just speaks to how Naipaul sees India. So, I mean, because of course, he has a different position than many other people. I mean, he had a very different upbringing and a different outside perspective on India as a whole. I mean, so anyway, that's a different discussion. You were asking something though.
No, you've answered the question, which was about the whole Sewell thesis, about the Vijayanagara being placed by colonial historiography as the sort of last ditch.
Right,
stand.
and so what I'm saying is that colonial historiography is still the basic historiography we have. We do have people like Eaton and Wagner and all of these guys, complicating that whole situation and letting us see things in a more dynamic kind of perspective. So that's been good. But like you said,
do you want to again say a word about that, just in case anyone who's watching this doesn't know the Phil Wagner's work and Dick Eaton's work?
Yeah.
The whole Lipakshi article that Wagner wrote. And so
yeah. I mean, yes. So Richard Eaton, you read from, historian, it does some excellent work on the Deccan and Sufis of Bijapur, his first book. Philip Wagner, amazing scholar. I've relied on his work heavily. He wrote that fantastic article, The Sultan Amongst Hindu Kings, about the dress at Vijayanagara. And then, of course, his thesis work, I think it was his thesis work. But anyway, his main work, Rayavachakam, the translation of that was a major Telugu translation done by someone. So fantastic work, and relied on those guys both heavily. But now I lost what I was trying to say. So those guys came along and have tried to make the situation more complex, which is wonderful, and we need to have that discussion. But getting back to what you were saying, like, I mean, I'm not on Twitter or social media, and I really don't have any interest in any of that stuff. I just want to discuss things at a scholarly level. Scholarly meaning, let's all sit down and read.
Life.
Sorry?
I said it makes for a much calmer life not to be on Twitter.
I like calm. I'd rather just be reading this beautiful Telugu poetry and stuff. So, you wanted pestilence, so let me do that. Now, I'm going to read a little bit from Amok the Malyada, because that really is the heart of it. I mean, here we have a poetic work, a vast, major poetic work by a king, and reading a poem like that brings deep insight into someone's life, which, hitherto had been considered, well, it's poetry, it's not really the kind of stuff you want to be using for history, but it, in fact, is a wonderful source. I mean, this is a direct, window into this man's mind.
And into his whole world.
Exactly. As a writer, you fully understand, how much your writing is a reflection of who you are. So this is a section where Krishnadevaraya is describing a Pandya king. And I'm going to read it out because it does have pestilence in here for you. But, he's describing this king, and in many ways, basically, he's describing what he sees as ideal kingship, what he aspires to be. So it's a few verses here, but they're quite lovely. The way that both poetry, the imagination of, statesmen and leadership are all kind of embedded in one kind of discourse. So, endowed with the 6 traits of a mighty monarch and tactfully employing the 4 modes of governance, you are the wisest ruler, wiser than all your advisors. Lord of the hills, Mount Malaya is your playground. You marked Golden Mountain with your fame and controlled gathering rain clouds like a herd of elephants bound in chains. You crossed the sea like a present-day Rama and befriended the Lord of Lanka, becoming royal friends like royal swans playing in the clear waters of the Copper River. The genuine blessings of Agastya are with you, and even Lord Indra fears your 1,000 arrows. With sacred incantations, you control an army of ghosts, like Shiva himself in royal disguise. Raising the fish emblem banner in your capital of Mathura, you are the perfect sovereign of the Pandya Empire. You never levy high taxes that might burden your people. You never allow gossip to pierce your heart or ruin your mood. You never punish the most slanderous offenders. You never taunt your cowardly enemies, and always accept praise with humility. Yeah. I know it goes on and on. I'll just read the one for the locust for you. While the Pandya king rules, the land is prosperous, protected from each of the 6 deadly plagues. Parrots chained with necklaces are kept in pet cages, while locusts are scorched by our king's splendor. Rats infest mansions.
What we need to do, right?
Rats infest mansions deserted in conquered cities, while droughts are relieved with the must that flows from fallen elephants. Rival kings rattle on our king's anklet, and flooding is turned into royal giving, generously flowing from our king's hand. And like this, the Pandya lord spent his time enjoying the glories of his empire.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Wonderful. Oh, wonderful. No, we need his splendor back in Delhi. Apparently, the locusts are on their way.
I
They're on
know.
the halfway down the Naipaul highway.
Yeah, the 6 deadly plagues, they never leave us. So, and this is how I felt he wanted to be. This is his idea of what kingship should really be. And I don't think it's a hollow recipe.
Give us a little synopsis of his life. The world he was born into, then his career. We haven't, let's go chronologically. I'll shut up for a bit. You talk us through his life.
Okay, through his life. Well, this is a big question. Is where did he come from? What is his background? What is his caste? Without getting into details, certainly we can say that he was not a Brahmin. Certainly, he was not what we would consider a Kshatriya. He was certainly of a lower caste. I don't know if we want to call that Dalit or not. I would not actually say that. But certainly not from some kind of ruling family or scholarly family.
Interesting.
Yeah. He was the son of a general who was not, high-ranking himself, besides his military rank. And, Vijayanagara was in a very unstable kind of position at this point, precarious at many levels. It had just gone through a couple dynastic successions. This is in the late 15th century. And then Raya is born, and to what I believe, and again, I don't get into this too much in the book, but he must have been raised away from the capital, swept away. Usually the princes were raised in like sub-capitals to keep them away from things. So probably raised somewhere in, Chandragiri or Penakunda. And I believe Timarasu must have put him into a Sri Vaishnava mata of some kind, or had an initiation as a Sri Vaishnava with a guru. Because if you read Amok then no one would doubt that whoever wrote this was deeply involved in the arcana of Sri Vaishnava philosophy. So must have had training heavily in that world, certainly in Sanskrit, different languages. Tulu was most likely his mother tongue language, but he learned all these things.
Do you have a mutt in mind in Penukonda or somewhere, or Chandragiri, that
I do.
you think?
I do, and I gotta go there. It's one of my big ones to visit. It's Ahobilam. I don't know if you know this one. Ahobilam is in the Nalamala range. It comes at the end there. The other one that the other temple that people talk about is Sri Salem. There was one trip where Raya probably visited both of these on his way back to Vijayanagara at some point. But Ahobilam, I believe, is the place. Yeah. That's the next project, getting it, because that's famous because it has the Navanarasimha, the 9 Narasimhas. And Narasimha is a very interesting, character, and I kind of closed the book with that image too of the the man lion and the ferocious with the compassionate kind of being together. So anyway, getting back to Raya, that was the early life. We don't know much. He ascended the throne either directly from his father or after his little older brother had ruled for some time. Basically, he was an incredible leader who could bring people together, inspire people, and went on the first big campaign of his life for 7 years against the Gajapatis. These were Hindu kings, which is really his arch nemesis. Because, as the stories go, the Gajapati would tease him as calling him Dasiputra, the son of a slave, the son of a servant person. And Raya,
really?
Oh, yes. And then Raya was always, kind of trying to present himself as the great dharmic king who knew Sanskrit, who could do all these things. So there's that dynamic that happens
In some
between
ways,
them.
the parallel with Shivaji, who also was not from the upper echelons of society.
Well, in the sense that these people were all representatives of what was happening at this time, this massive social transformation, as Dick Eaton, very clearly shows in that the whole egalitarian social mobility that takes on a even greater urgency, later on and during Shivaji's time in the later Mughal period. So yeah, absolutely.
So he comes to power,
So he comes
and he then goes to war.
Yeah, he goes to war, has this huge campaign against the Gajapati, defeats him, kind of reclaims the land, ends up having also these big battles with the sultans in the region. So that's kind of like the massive information that we have from historical sources. Then there's this kind of imagined history of, the great poet, the great man of the people who would go out in disguise and interact with people and joke around and all of that. And so I tried to...
Like Caliph al-Rashid.
Sorry?
Go around his capital in disguise.
Yes. That's one of the great themes, being a man of the people and wanting to know what people are really saying about you, not here, because so many of the poems in the Rajaniti section, for example, are about his lords. And it's like these lords, these lords are always just telling you what you want to hear. They're always just kind of like kissing up to you. Like, if you really want to know, you need a friend who can actually tell you the truth, not a guy that's going to bullshit you. And so he had that kind of sense of, the real politic is in the real people of it. So anyway, that aspect of his life, that more poetic, humanized aspect, I tried to draw in through the use of all of these stories, myths, and his own poetry. Of course, towards the end of his life, you do see this kind of fatal flaw aspect coming in, that all of this success, undefeated in battle, kind of went to his head and kind of gets a little out of control. There's the great Kiss My Foot incident with the Sultan of Bijapur, which basically leads to not Krishnadevaraya's direct demise, but certainly you could argue the demise of all of Vijayanagara, some half century later, or something like that. Not even, like 25 years
Just in case
later.
anyone here doesn't know that story, do you want to tell that just now?
Which one?
The kissing the foot, the fatal flaw of his arrogance.
Oh, you can read the book for that one.
Very good. But enough to say that it lights a fuse of dynamite.
Yeah.
A gunpowder trap.
Yeah. So, I mean, in regard to the other kind of point that you were getting at, and the idea of, whatever the Hindu king in a cosmopolitan world, and one thing that I would like to present is, this moment in time, 1500, for me is like a really critical moment. Everything starts shifting at that point, and we could talk about that a little later, because all these factors are coming in. But more importantly,
the Mughals on their way.
Yeah, exactly.
Delhi Sultanate in chaos.
Yeah. Portuguese and Goa. So, no, the point I would like to make is, sometimes we shy away, particularly, academics, I think, to get into like a Hindu king and what that means and critiquing that. But at some level, we have to come to face the fact that he was a Hindu king, in the sense that he was a devout Hindu in his personal life. Whether or not that translates to state affairs, I would not say. Yes, there were state affairs that had, pujas and idols, and you can read about that. But I don't think that meant that, that was the state religion. So the fact that he's a Hindu king, I think, is a very important point to make. And he was, I would say that. He was a devout Sri Vaishnava, if anything.
And a great donor to Chidambaram and to many great temples.
Exactly. So you mentioned Chidambaram in particular, which is, of course, a Shaiva temple, Nataraja, and so he can be a Vaishnava and easily donate to a Shaiva temple, no problem. That is the whole, and that's where the cosmopolitan comes in. So Hindu in a cosmopolitan world are totally, fine and no problem. You can be totally Hindu. Yeah, Tirupati was his Ishta Devata that he gave, there's a whole chapter in the book on Tirupati that, he gave so much money to Tirupati, and then Tirupati rose to popularity probably in large part to, his public appearance in that place. The image on the cover is also from Tirupati as well. That's the stone bronze, copper bronze. You can see that when you visit Tirupati today. So yeah, it's quite
It's fantastic. Thanks.
yeah.
The only image of him that doesn't have his wives on too. Normally he appears as a thinker.
Yeah, this photo does have the wives next to him, but they cut them out for this one. And the amazing thing about that is he put both his wives there. Not only his senior wife Tirumala Devi, who was the official wife that had the proper status as the the first queen, but then his true love, this dancer who we hear about from the stories, Chinna Devi, but she's right there in the Tirupati bronze, right next to him. So it's quite lovely. Yeah.
And on the door in Chidambaram, I think, isn't it? That little image as you.
There's an image. There's an image of Raya, but yeah, not with the wives there. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 One of the few people.
So talk about was definitely his rule the climax in Vijayanagar. Are we right to see him as the moment when Vijayanagar was at its most powerful?
Absolutely. Raya represents an apex not only in the kind of military whatever, but also more importantly, and this is what I meant about 1500, it represents the pinnacle of all Indian knowledge traditions, which from then on basically decline in very fast succession. He represents the height of a tradition, the height of a knowledge system. And I'm not even talking just Telugu or Sanskrit. All of Indian knowledge system, the way it was transmitted, the pedagogy, the everything, all of that completely changes after him. So in many ways, he represents this great apex of culture and political power and everything.
And yet a figure that even today is not very well known in North India, outside his own realms. He's not a figure that people know in the way that they know Akbar, for example.
Yeah, that's the whole thing. We Indians don't know anything about ourselves. That's the biggest problem. Even today, North Indians, I don't know much about South India. South Indians don't know much about North Indian. East Indians don't know about West Indians. We need to know ourselves better, and then we'll all be in a better place.
Before we open this up to questions, I think we're heading, we're now about 15 minutes from the end. Just one last question from me before we open it up. Sources. What were the, how rich are the sources other than his own writing, which you talked about? Who else is writing about him?
Yep. So besides the poetic stuff, and there's a couple of other Telugu poets that I use, the main and most important source of Vijayanagara history that we have, and of Krishnadevaraya's life, is without question those two Portuguese chronicles. I read those in and out so many times, and I'm like, oh my God, how did I miss that? I've read this like 20 times, and you know what I mean? Some of these sources, you're like, wow, I just forgot about this little tidbit that was in there. So that one, those are really, really rich, and they really give us the heart of it. Raya Vachakam was the other one that I relied a lot upon. The interesting thing about that, and just to talk about sources, and you'll appreciate this as a historian, is that, you see, Raya Vachakam was written much after Raya, and it's written from the perspective of a made-up ambassador who is like a court kind of messenger at the Vijayanagara court, giving a report back to a Madura Nayak king. Right, so it's this weird, asynchronic kind of imagination of Vijayanagara, and in so doing, it also starts to elevate that myth of who this king was as the model to go after, the great king, blah blah blah, all of that kind of thing. So this is, I would say, how it evolves, and so. The Portuguese sources, the Raya Vachakam, and the poetic sources. Oh, and Farishta. The Persian sources are pretty quiet, to be honest. They don't even mention Raya by name. Yeah.
Really?
There's some stuff on Devaraya, but there's not much on Raya at all.
The ambassador Abdul Razak is before, isn't he? What, 2 generations
Yes. He comes earlier. Yes.
How interesting! Not a single named mention in North Indian sources.
Well, I mean, it's sometimes it's hard to tell because they just call them all Raya and stuff like that. But given the significance of Krishnadevaraya specifically, it's surprising that he doesn't figure in any significant way in Farishta really at all.
How interesting!
A little bit when we hear about the Battle of Raichur, but not much else. Yeah.
So listen, we have 10 minutes left before we get shut off. Do we want to open this up to questions?
Sure. Did you want to ask anything else? I mean, please feel free.
If we've got 10 minutes, maybe somebody else wants to ask something. Shiva Priya, maybe.
Oh yeah, sure. Shiva Priya, would you like to ask something?
Yes, the bronze on the cover, Srini.
Yeah.
Was that made during his lifetime? And did he look as beautiful as that bronze?
Yes. So I talk about that in the book. It was, I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think it might have been made actually in his lifetime. Because I think there's a reference in Tirupati about the time when they established it, and I think Raya might have been there. So I will look into that exact reference and get back to you on it. This is a statue that you can see today. So right before you go into the Garbhagriha in Tirupati, if you look back, instead of towards Venkateswara, if you look back, you will see Raya and his 2 wives standing there with, praying hands. And he certainly did not look like this, Sivapriya. We actually, from the Portuguese sources, we know that he was much more stout, much more largely stocky kind of man. He did not have this slim, slender figure that you see here at all. The interesting thing to note here, though, and this relates back to Wagner's article that, Will, that you had mentioned, is the head dress there. Yes.
Yeah.
This is, not the kind of turban-like cap that you often see Krishnadevaraya wearing. This is a more canonical shaped cap, very unique cap, which may or may not exactly be the one that Wagner is talking about, but there could have certainly been a Persian influence in the headgear of this period.
No, it is very specifically, I think, the same hat that you get in Lapakshi that Wagner does talk about in that article, that tall conical hat.
Yeah.
Absolutely it, yeah.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yes. So, yep, that's the statue. Anything else?
The sculptor put him on a diet.
Yeah, he's on a dais. Yeah, it's stunning actually. That one. It's amazing to see that. I mean, the real point with Indian history is that it's still alive. All these, you can go to Hampi right now and you can feel this book. That's why I loved that you wrote that, you should read this book before you go to Hampi, because I think it does give people a little background, because when you get there, you can imagine now what really happened at this magnificent, beautiful kind of thing that happened and then just kind of disappeared. It was just like out of thin air, it just left like that. But it's all still there. The ruins are there. Those beautiful boulders are there. You could see it. You can visit this statue. You can go to Tirupati. You can go to Ahobilam. It's amazing.
I've never been to Tirupati. I'd love to go to Tirupati.
Oh, let's go. But we got to walk.
I'll come.
Okay, we got to walk though. That shows the true devotion of a Bhakta.
We'll both look like Krishnadevaraya in the sculpture after we've had our.
Well, at Tirupati, though, once you get to the top, then you have to shave your head. Then I
haven't anything much left anyway. So.
I know, neither do I. So Raya was also supposed to have like pock marks on his face. And it's interesting because the sculpture also, he was supposed to be barefoot. That's at least what the Portuguese tell us. And this is an eyewitness account, which is, again, something incredibly rare when it comes to pre-modern Indian figures. Getting back to your sense of biography and that humanizing thing, the real stuff. And if an Indian remembers the king, it'll be like this. It'll be this thin, beautiful guy. That's how we want to imagine. But when the Portuguese write it, you know, they say, oh, he was wearing this and he had this and it looked like that. And so having those perspectives come together is really the heart of it.
What is your next project, Srinivas? Have you got another follow-up from this now?
Oh, I don't know. There's like 100 projects in my mind. I mean, I would love to do, you know, like this to me, like you were saying, the pinnacle, right? This is like the pinnacle. So this is like book 2. Book 1 is like, you know, looking at Harihara and Bukka and the founding of Vijayanagara, that whole story, them being sent. Yeah, them going to Delhi, their whole encounter there, their ostensible conversion to Islam. It's so fascinating. They come back, they find Vidyaranya to create Vijayanagara. So that's a whole big story. And then, of course, everything that happens with Ramaraya after this, and the sultans and Talikota, and the end of Vijayanagara, and what happens to the Nayakas after, that's like book 3. So anyway.
And the whole story of, of Pedukonda and the kind of aftermath. I've never read anything good on that, on what happens to what's left. Yeah,
it's fascinating actually what happens, because it there survives, and then the whole Aravidu dynasty, which you don't hear about, they take over the remnants of Vijayanagara as it moves southward. And so all of that Vijayanagara power actually in the later phase moves basically to these Nayakas, and that's why they're imagining back to Vijayanagara as this great empire, you know, like their forefathers, that's where we came from, and the great Raya, you know, all of that. They're generating that mythology, you know.
It's such when you go to Pedukonda, it's such a resonant ruin. You think of these refugees coming in and after the defeat, after Talikota.
Yeah, and just to mention one other thing, you know, we were talking about this cosmopolitanism. I mean, the kind of theme that the central theme that I wanted to make in this issue is, you know, there's a certain kind of Indian cosmopolitanism that is different than what we would consider like secularism in modern parlance. I would not advocate that the Indian system was secular in any way. Like I'm saying, Raya was a devout Hindu. But you can be a devout Hindu and a politically powerful person who is accepting of many religions and take up a pluralistic attitude. So that it's that pluralism that makes the Indian cosmopolitanism unique. And so, for example, Penakunda, I was just talking with my guru the other day, Penakunda, and even in Vijayanagara, you can see them today. I visited the other day, Jain temples, very important centers of Jain learning. And they were supported there, no problem. And
still functioning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the mix of stuff going on was amazing. You know, that's really the wonder that we have to celebrate and kind of remember. And I feel like try to revive that kind of, you know, pluralism and celebration. That would be good for us. So.
Srinivas, looking at the time, it's 5 o'clock. So I fear the moment has come to wrap this up. But we could do 5 more sessions like this.
Let's do it. Yeah. Maybe any last question and then we can end? No? Then maybe I read one last poem to end?
That would be lovely.
Yeah. Oh, this is a beautiful section. And it really speaks to the philosophical nature, the real Kaviraja, the real philosopher king aspect of a great leader. You know, when I think of Krishnadevaraya, I think of people like Marcus Aurelius, you know, people that had their thinking at a little bit more philosophical level.
Philosopher kings.
Yeah. So, yes. There's a part where the king's going out to go meet one of his lovers in the city, okay? And then he says, on his way, the king overheard a visiting Brahmin recite a wise saying. And here's the wise saying. Just as you should gather provisions for the rainy season in the 8 months before the monsoon, you should prepare for night during the day, for old age when still young, and for the next life, right now, in this life. While you still can, you should try your very best to lead a righteous life. These words about life's inevitable future pierced the king's soul. The king listened to the proverb, reflected on it in his heart, understood its meaning, and stopped. He was stunned, overwhelmed, and petrified by his self-perpetuated delusions. He froze and stood in the middle of the road in utter distress. He thought to himself, "Oh, what is this glorious empire? What are these pleasures? Why these emotions? This body is nothing but a bubble about to burst. Even Manu, the primal man who was born at the dawn of time, was ultimately destroyed, trampled by the great god of death. I've enjoyed this life without ever considering the path to freedom. But have I really lived?" So, yeah, thank you. The kind of thinking that someone like that had, I mean, there's even a section in the Portuguese sources when, Timurasu is about to crown the young prince, Krishnadevaraya, as king, and he says, no, 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 I don't want this kingship. I just want to pass my life as a yogi. And then Timurasu says, no, 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 that's why, you have to do this, and blah, blah. So there was this theme of the renunciant king that was also there, again, into this philosopher king. So truly a fantastic person, an amazing figure of history. And thank you so much. And I thank you very deeply, Will, very much, my friend, my dear inspiration as well, and lovely work that you're doing, and excited to talk more with you. And we'll go to Tirupati next time.
That's what I'm going to hold you up to. I'd love to.
And I just want to thank also Professor Jain, Professor Sengupta, Professor Manjali, Shivapriya, Casey Pandey sir, and Tejasvi for coming and joining us and giving us that feeling of live atmosphere. We appreciate it. We're going to edit this video and bring it to you hopefully soon. So thank you all, and really appreciate your support. God bless.
Very good. Thanks, Srinivas.
Thank you.
Well done. Congratulations.
Bye.
Bye,
Thank you,
Srini.
Shivapriya.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Jason.
Bye.
Bye. Bye, Will.